poetry is born out of the act of imagination. Poetry is born out of daring to think of alternatives. That there are alternative ways of looking, and as I was telling and my friend William was quoting, there is a Wallace Stevens poem called 13 Ways of Looking at a Black Bird. So if there are 13 ways of looking at a black bird, there ought to be 1300 ways of looking at man in his world. And similar ways of changing the world. Poetry cannot be written if the hope for change has died. That would be the end of poetry. We cannot write if we are led to believe that nothing can be done, nothing can be changed, things have to be accepted as they are. One of the jobs of poetry is to dream, to make you dream. And again, if dreaming is not possible, and is only, we see what are the dreams that we are having. बहुत ही टुच्चे सपने हैं हम जो आजकल देखते हैं. एक दो कमरे का मकान है तो 3 का हो जाए, छोटी गाड़ी है तो बड़ी गाड़ी हो जाए, छोटा फ्रिज है तो बड़ा फ्रिज हो जाए. I mean, ये टुच्चे सपने, ये दुनिया थोड़ी बदल सकती है. You see, we have lived all these centuries in the belief that the world can be changed only by ideas, not by things. And we are led to believe now that things will change the world. There is a growing tyranny of uniformity in behaving, in your entertainment, in everything that you're doing. And poetry's job is to militate against all tyrannies, but more importantly, against the tyranny of uniformity. To make you aware that you are a distinct, unique human being, and that you must realize your uniqueness, solitary and solidarity. You have to be lonely. And this is another thing we are afraid of, being lonely. So we fill it with noises, with television, with this, that and the other, because we are afraid of being lonely. A lonely person faces himself or herself. And the world, my dear friends, has been changed by people radically by only those who were not afraid of becoming lonely. And our great poet sang, Akla chalo re, jadi tor dakshune keu na ashe. If nobody comes in answer to your call, walk alone. That's what Gandhi did. That's what Marx did. That's what all the great changers of the world did. You have to value and come back to your loneliness. And poetry is one of the ways by which you are rehabilitated. You are returned to your loneliness. Where you face yourself, the inner darknesses or illuminations of your soul, if you have one, is still left, and it has not been sold out in the big bazaar or wherever. The world can do without poetry, but unfortunately poetry cannot do without the world. That is the one simple thing to remember. World is necessary for poetry. And actually poetry is born out of the love and lure of the world. He or she who doesn't love the world should not be a poet. Kavita sansar ka gungan hai. You praise the world. You praise the fact that you are born. You praise the fact that you are in this world, full of imperfections, contradictions, agonies, full of violences, this, that, and the other. But the world is worth loving. And poetry is born out of that love and lure, as I said. One of the things which a poet many a time sadly remember, that language is not created by them. Language is a social property. They have been given the gift of language by the society. Nobody creates a new language. I mean, if you are a Paul Celan, perhaps, and you have been through the Holocaust, you may try to create a new kind of a language, but still it will be within the given German language. So, this is a tension. You have this social inheritance, and the society by and large doesn't care for you. I mean, nobody asks, society doesn't appoint poets. It once in a while honors them, even the wrong ones, mostly the wrong ones really. But it doesn't ask anybody, you should write poetry. Each poem is a half-truth. It reveals its truth only when you add a bit of your own truth to it. That's how the truth of the poem is completed. That's why you have to have an active role. You can't be just a recipient, a passive recipient. Then you are not worthy of listening to poetry. There are better things in life to do. I mean, to go for a walk and to put on a jasmine garland, or there are all kinds of good things. But if you want to be vulnerable to poetry, you have to give a bit of yourself to it. The poetry demands you to be involved in the act of truth-giving. It will not yield its truth to you unless you have added. That's why there are so many different interpretations. A single poem, you know, there are more than 1,000 books on Hamlet alone. More than 1,000 books. And they are not repetitive, and they are not unnecessary. They are not redundant. They are serious studies. The same great play. Why? Because there are different ways of interpreting, there are different ways of looking, and each one is adding his or her little truth to the truth given by the poem. You see, we all live in our own time, unfortunately. And you can't possibly live in another time, even if you watch, National Geographic or whatever. You live in your own time. Poetry is one of those things, actually literature is one of those things, which can transport you from your time to another time. And in fact, it can make another time come to your time. When you read a real good poem, it reminds you also of what has been written before. So maybe in one of my poems there might be a resonance of a 16th century poet. And in the 16th century poet, there might be a resonance of a 3rd century poet. Poetry is also a way of remembering, a way of recalling what has happened in the realm of poetry before. Why do we listen to Kabir today? He was a 16th, 15th, 16th century poet, and his circumstances, his political, social circumstances, etc. have completely changed. Ours are very different. And yet we listen, and yet we find, therefore there is no notion of progress in poetry and the arts. Changes take place, but progress does not happen. Plurality of the world, plurality of time, and plurality of truth. All these are essential ingredients for poetry. We must have the assurance that there is a plurality of time, that there is a plurality of truth, that there is a plurality of the world. If the world becomes more or less uniform, if the world becomes more or less without any variety, and the world becomes a place which is totally predictable, poetry again is born out of a deep sense of the mystery and a deep sense of wonder. You cannot write poetry if you do not realize that the world remains very mysterious, that our life is very mysterious. In spite of all the progress that we have made, there is still vast areas which will remain unknowable, which are unknown in any case. And it is essential that we have that sense of mystery. And the other is wonder. Every time I finish a poem, I am wonder-struck that this is what I wanted to do. I didn't know this. I didn't know this part of my being. So wonder and mystery. And both of them are at a very low premium these days. because everything can happen. We have come to believe that man will ultimately know everything and that there will be nothing left except that you wait. Except that you wait, there will be nothing left to wonder about, because ultimately it's going to happen. And this is not true. This may not happen at all. And mind you, it's not accidental that most religions have their first major books, holy books, all written in poetry. I mean, Bible is in poetry, Vedas are in poetry, Quran is in poetry, and a whole lot of other, which is not a special gift to poetry. It is a special gift of poetry to religions. That they said, well, since you want to remember all these things, these revelations of God or whatever, we can offer you some help. And that's how these great books. So it is not accidental that this is happening.